Why are people against unions? I'm struggling to understand the ideology of people who don't like the idea of unions. I live in Texas, which people call a right-to-work state. I know some places will require you to be in a union while employed there. But how would that disrupt one's right to work? I've tried to ask people Google, but the convo usually turns into politics stuff. I'm union and have been so for the last decade. I think one of the problems with Reddit is that people who are pro-union have a very idealized view of what it is because they're not union themselves, and people who aren't union have an incredibly negative view of what it is. Unions are just collective bargaining organizations in which the deal you get is only as strong as the union is. The unions that people love are typically the ones that suck the most and get the worst deals for their employees. Good unions basically never strike because they don't have to. Unions reduce corporate power and may reduce profit. And the people who run corporations don't like having less power and money. There has been a very effective campaign over the last 150-ish years in the US to demonize union labor and associate it with crime and communism. This has been effective in convincing a lot of people that unions are bad. It can be harder to fire or reprimand someone if they are a union member, even when they absolutely deserve it. Some people hate them because they cut into their profits. Some people hate them because unions can be just as shitty as the companies they're meant to protect you from. There's not one simple answer to your question. Believe it's mostly people who don't really need the union but still pay some hefty dues. Then it becomes another question on what exactly does that union do to the dues. I think that's where some PPL become a bit anti-union because of that. When it came time to fight for my rights, the union didn't, even though I worked extra hard. The lazy asshole that had been there a year longer got to keep his job when the layoffs came around. The moment I left a unionized work environment, I was picked up by a non-union contractor, paid and treated significantly better, and offered lots of opportunity to succeed. My career has now blossomed. You're asking the wrong group of people if you want a serious answer. I love how top comment isn't answering the question at all but instead just calling it wrong. Answer: not all unions are good. Some are borderline scams where you pay more in dues than you get in raises. Some people have been fucked over. My dad was very anti-union because he believed that unions protected workers from any repercussions when they performed poorly, and that if you were really a good worker, the company would appreciate you and take care of you. Joining a union meant that you didn't want to work hard and were basically a freeloader trying to slack as much as possible. My dad is also a very mediocre dude, and it's part of a larger belief system in which he is worthy and everyone else is lazy. Unions keep bad workers and don't reward good ones. Other than the stories in the news, I've never heard a single real-life situation where it helped a worker. Fuck unions. I get why business owners are anti-union, but not why non-business owners are often anti-union. The one insight I have from an anti-union non-business owner is that people shouldn't mess with the economy. She is convinced that unions are somehow messing things up for the larger society and make things worse. I guess in her eyes exploitative employers either aren't a thing or somehow don't count as messing with the economy. For me personally, I like being able to negotiate on my own terms, not some set standard that a union has negotiated on my behalf whether I agree with it or not. Not to mention cost of living is typically cheaper in right-to-work states. I've also always looked at unions as bullies. My father-in-law was working for a company in PA, and when doing work in Philly, he would have to tell his guys, "Don't tell them we're not union." He said some union boss would try and organize a protest outside their office and force them to unionize. Dated a guy who was hugely anti-union. He had a degree in business. His arguments basically came down to one: there is no need for them anymore because workers have rights now. And two, unions end up bleeding the corporation dry by demanding too much money and other benefits for workers. Some unions are great while others are exploitative. I have a love-hate relationship with my union because of the ridiculous amount of dues I pay, plus I get no paid PTO. Was anti-unions for 35 years, independent remodeling contractor. Things went to shit in 2008 and went to work for Boeing in the Seattle area and had to join union. Best decision ever. Before best year $60K, no benefits. 13 years later $120K and benefits up the wazoo. They moved some production to SC for cheap wages. And the product was crap. Now we are fixing it here. They tried to unionize there. Boeing spent millions to dissuade workers. BTW $40 less pay there. Poor dumb fucks, and they live in fear of management having a bad day and getting fired. Simple. Corporations hate them because unions cut into their profits. Unionized workers pay into membership with their unions. And then they collectively bargain for wages, benefits, etc. That collective power can mean the corporation will pay a lot more than they'd prefer to employ those workers. Florida also is a RTW state, and that's a rather convenient anti-union mechanism to discourage unionizing and also give employers an easier way to fire people at will, even without cause. Lots of people think union workers are lazy and slack off because they are protected by collective bargaining. Many of those people project that because that's what they'd do if given the chance. Usually the big one is a concept of individuality. They don't want to be part of something that potentially takes away from their paycheck. They also tend to be under the idea that they one day will make it. Unions would just take away from their profits. Back in the day, there were some unions with very corrupt bosses and a sketchy management structure. And that stereotype carries over to today. There are still issues in unions today, but it seems like a much better situation for workers to practice collective bargaining than not. I used to work in a union. Do not recommend. Unions filled the gaps until labor's laws caught up. Now unions just cause problems. Amassing money with generally less than ideal oversight. Disrupting productive work with archaic rules. They are also extremely cliquey. If you don't fit in, they make it easier to be rid of you. In spite of being in a right-to-work state I live in. As someone who is in a union, and I like unions, I'll give you a personal example. My company has said they want to give us a better wage and better hours. However, the union has to agree to everything first. Well, over the course of several meetings and several months, paperwork got lost and lies were told. And now we didn't get the pay increase or better schedule hours. We are currently seeking to sue our union for failure to represent and seek a new union. But that's a very tricky thing to do and prove. Right to work means right to fire. People aren't against unions. Corporations are. Because they've grown up with unions and have no clue how horrific work conditions were before they existed. A business wouldn't negotiate with the unions if it wasn't in their best interest to do so. The most effective unions are the one bargaining on behalf of the most skilled and in-demand workers. Unions exist in a lot of professional settings, we just call them something else. Your state's bar association is a great example. Can't work if you don't belong. Must pay dues.